Chapter 25, Enemies, both foreign and domestic, Washington, D.C., 2021. This is what officers in the military swear. They swear to protect the Constitution from enemies, both foreign and domestic. In the first days of January 2021, Tom and I haul moving boxes up and down 4 floors of our new townhouse in Maryland, only 20 minutes away from the heart of the Capitol building in D.C. Both of us can't wait for the new president to take office. It's been especially hard for me watching this country I fought for being led by a cult leader for the last 4 years. I've tried to avoid the news for my own sanity. To a cult baby like me, living in America during the Trump administration has been just like living life under the drunken, rambling mandates of David Berg. I've begun a master's degree program at Harvard in industrial and organizational psychology, and I'm framing much of my research and projects around looking at similarities between cults, militaries, terrorist groups, and other kinds of closed-off societies, and finding threads running through them all. I know exactly what cultic thinking looks like, and I know that's exactly what we have seen come over much of the United States. The rush to extremes the world always experiences during times of drastic change, when systems are failing and power is shifting, and nobody really knows how it will turn out. The morning of January 6th dawns for me with a special excitement. A major literary agency is scheduled to send out the book proposal for my first memoir to editors. This story that has become the culmination of all the work I've done, thinking about groups and my place in them. It has been over a year in the making, most of my rough drafts written as my family navigated the country in our RV. The air around me is crackling with excitement, and I know that somehow in 2021, my little book about cults and group behavior is going to find a home. I know because 2020 closed out with pretty much one single question on the lips of 300 million Americans. How the hell did we get here? I know I have answers to that, answers that maybe others are missing, those who had not yet experienced living under tyrannical, unstable authoritarians. Instead of January 6th being the day of my private victory, of the beginning of a life-changing book deal, it becomes a day of national terror. Tom and I watch a mob of domestic terrorists, the kind we'd once sworn our very lives to defend America against, storm the U.S. Capitol building just a short drive from our new home. In much the same way I could always see the cult behavior and groupthink in what other people thought were just normal groups, Tom and I can see something we know few of the civilians watching are likely to pick up. There are veterans in that mob, so many of them. People who'd once sworn, just like us, to defend the Constitution have now become the domestic enemies themselves. Veterans can almost always pick out other veterans. It's in the way we carry ourselves, a symbol hidden somewhere obvious, a specific hand gesture, the subtle, buzzing alertness of being always on guard, of trying to minimize your exposure and blind spots, and to never sit with your back to the door. And it's in the kinds of special equipment we carry with us to battle. It is clear to us that not only is this a planned and coordinated attack, but that it was planned and coordinated by some of our own. We know the guy with the zip ties dangling from his belt is a veteran, long before we know he is retired Air Force Lieutenant Colonel Larry Rendell Brock Jr. And we know he never planned for this to be a peaceful protest, because he brought those zip ties along to be used as handcuffs. Americans on the whole will learn in the coming days that over 20% of the defendants implicated in the January 6th attacks are veterans of some branch of the U.S. military. And people begin to ask with shock over and over again, how could this happen? It's the question people always ask when a cult makes the news. but I know the truth. I'd been trained on extremist ideology, on cult think, since the day I was born. I think of the many people Tom and I know from our 26 plus combined years in the Army, many of whom we've watched fall slowly but steadily further and further down the path of radicalization. Friends like Andrew Sims, who'd been one of my closest coworkers and friends, who stood by me through a hard deployment, who brought me into his family. He'd been the one to get a pastor's license so that he could preside over my wedding to Tom, and he and his wife had been some of our closest friends. That had all begun to change last election, slowly but surely. On January 6th, our rift became complete, with him declaring his sympathies with the Capitol mob, and me in tears, all too familiar with losing friends and family because of extremism. In the coming days, I find out that Auntie Aurora, the sister of Mary's dad, who'd had no problem coaching and preparing me for exploitation on the family's videos in my earliest years, who'd for decades run the Family Care Foundation, an organization founded specifically to defraud the US government out of grant money, is one of the patriots now. I remember her as the fun, kind, young auntie who'd created a youth group for the family kids in San Diego to get together. She'd been born into the same extremism I was, raised to call America Babylon the whore, and she'd never gotten out. And now it seems she'd gone full circle from being born and raised in our America-hating cult to being part of a domestic terrorist attack on the US Capitol in the name of patriotism. I turn her into the FBI for her participation, like so many Americans will do when they come face to face with the incontrovertible evidence that their loved one had been radicalized into extremism, often right under their noses. Unlike most Americans, I'm not shocked that people who'd once been close to me ended up ideologically so far away. I understand all too easily how it happens. Scholars have shown over and over again that falling prey to a cult has nothing to do with intelligence, income, or even religion. It simply happens when someone is seeking, often because they feel a strong sense of impending doom, of fear for their future, and finds a group that enthralls them with their ideas and holds them in isolation long enough that they begin to reflect the group norms. Eventually, many are not able to see through the circular logic and conspiracy theories, and they continue on even when the promised apocalypse never arrives, following their leader unquestioningly, even to the steps of the US Capitol. 6 weeks later, I'm being sworn in over the phone at a military tribunal. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? I'm glad they can't see me roll my eyes at the God part. I do, I say, automatically lowering my voice to sound more commanding, the way I learned to do as a military officer. I wonder briefly what Jeff's reaction is in that courtroom, hearing my voice after 11 years. I realize I know the answer. I know exactly what his face looks like in this moment. Stony, cold, staring straight ahead. He never did show any emotion except anger. I'm strong, I remind myself. He can't reach me. He can't affect me anymore. It's been a long time since I've prayed. This feels close. Can you tell the court your full name, military record, what you do now, and your state of residence for the record? Daniella Claire Mestenek Young, I state clearly, suddenly terrified that Jeff now has my new last name. Army Captain, Military Intelligence, 2009 to present. I still hold a commission in the inactive reserves. 2 deployments with the 101st, the regular bling everyone has, and a Presidential Volunteer Service Award. I pause, letting that marinate, knowing the power of that last bit of my record. I'm currently at Harvard Extension School studying organizational psychology, focused on group behavior, cults, and I pause again for effect. Extremism. I know from experience that they will be stuck on the Harvard name for a few seconds, then tune back in time to hear extremism. No matter that the Army prefers men, and especially combat arms men, it will be hard for them not to take my words seriously. Then, with my heart pounding so loudly, I'm afraid everyone can hear it through the phone, I say what I'd rehearsed with the lawyer. I'd rather not give any information about my whereabouts for the safety of my family. It's the truth. Tom and I had discussed how dangerous it could be to testify. The lust for violence in Jeff's online screeds had been clear as day, as he called for nuclear war against America's most populous cities and offered to use his combat training to train warriors in the coming race war. What was there to stop him from trying to kill me? Especially now that he would have me to blame if he lost everything as a result of today. I know Jeff had told his lawyer not to worry about me, that we had zero contact in a decade, that there was nothing I could say to hurt him. I know he thinks this is the truth. He always thought he was smarter than me. I know that I can confirm for the court everything they need to know, because the second I'd opened the email with his name on it and read the accusations that followed, everything became so clear to me. Jeff's lawyer lazily tries to slander me with the old, tired adultery claims, saying I am a disgruntled ex-wife, now part of the conspiracy against him. The board doesn't give that much credence, moving on to question me about what I know about Jeff from earlier years. When they ask me if he'd ever showed a penchant for violence, I talk about his love of guns, how he'd almost been kicked off campus for having a weapon in his apartment, and a second time for pulling a gun at a fraternity event. Both times he'd gotten off with a slap on the wrist. I tell them about my puppy, Zeus, how pitiful and tiny he looked next to that handgun that was bigger than him. I tell them about the threat Jeff had posted on Craigslist. Gotta read the book, listen to the book for that. And then I tell them that I, an Army captain, more than familiar with violent extremism, am scared of him now. And then they ask me the same question that everyone is asking. Why do you think it happened? If, as you say, Captain Young, began one of the high-ranking brass, he's likely held this sort of ideology for a long time, for at least a decade or more, according to you. How was he able to get so far in his Army career? I mean, I'm looking at his records, and they are stellar. Top-notch evaluation, promoted always on time, good runner. It's hard not to laugh at the absurdity of it all. I think of all the footage Tom and I have watched of January 6th, knowing how many veterans in active military are deep into extremism and always have been. Now people are actually paying attention, forcing the military into situations like this, where they have to listen to people like me. Because, sir, I answer, he's good at putting on a face, at showing the Army what they want to see. Right place, right time, right uniform, right? I quote the ubiquitous Army phrase we all use to promise our members that anyone can succeed, no talent necessary. Anyone can be a useful part of the machine, even a high-ranking and powerful piece, as long as they put their head down and go along and don't make trouble. The truth is, the U.S. Army loves violent men that look like they can kill you with their strong, bare hands. That's their bread and butter. And that's why Jeff was a resounding success, even with all his extremism humming along below the surface. People full of hatred are great at killing people, and what the military cares about above all else is maintaining power. It all made sense to me by the time I had finished reading the 75-page PowerPoint presentation that an ex-military intelligence soldiers and his buddies had put together, connecting a random screen name on the Army Reddit thread to active Army Reserves Major William Jeffrey Poole. I hadn't been able to see the indicators so many years ago, having just come out of my own extremist prison. But looking back, now so experienced in studying the processes of radicalization into extremist thinking in cults, in terrorist groups, in veterans that stormed the Capitol, I could see the truth clear as day. The truth about Jeff, the truth about me, and the truth about America. It was that thing I'd been trying to figure out since I was 15 years old and first arrived in America, alone and afraid. The reason I'd always been treated so much better than I deserved. Why policemen looked at me with smiles, but with suspicion at my brown and black-skinned friends. The summer of protests in 2020 had made so painfully clear to anyone who didn't have their heads in the sand that it wasn't just about bias. It was about white supremacy. It was about violence. It was the belief, conscious or not, that we were better, that everything we had was because we deserved it. And every struggle they had, well, maybe they deserved it too. What I could see clearly now was from the second I'd set foot in America, white supremacy had worked tirelessly on its mission to radicalize me, as it does to all white people, insidiously, quietly offering us better treatment if we'll agree to uphold systems that keep the others down. Of course, Jeff claims the posts don't belong to him, that some low-ranking and disgruntled soldier is trying to set him up. I know Jeff had been the author of those posts, even if these men making the decisions didn't know it yet beyond a reasonable doubt. I know because the screen name that had been used was an obscure word from a dead Germanic language, a term for fighter that is quietly used in white nationalist circles by those who call themselves the alt-white. It's a word I'd been introduced to when I was 19 years old by Jeff, when he was only 21 himself. A word I had not heard since. The screen name, one of many clues that the poster in question had used, was Nibor. There's an earlier chapter called What is a Nibor? With all due respect, gentlemen, it's because angry, violent, white men is who the U.S. Army selects for. I finish. In the days that follow, I walk around my new townhouse in a daze, under both the news of my memoir Uncultured selling in a life-changing deal and the sudden return of Jeff into my life. I'm plagued by flashbacks, hearing his voice over and over again in my mind. All of those words that seemed so innocuous to me at 19 years old, complimentary, and like they would make me strong. I can't stop staring at the reflection of my stupid face in the mirror, wishing I could rip it off and discard it, like the many costumes and identities I've worn throughout my life. Your perfect face, Daniella, the perfect children we'll have, the most perfect look in the world. Your Eastern European beauty, those high cheekbones. I'd often wondered why he chose me. Maybe it was because I seemed so lost, so malleable. Maybe because predators have an instinct for victims who are already used to being prey. And maybe my face, my perfect Aryan face, was also why he'd wanted me. And he had mistakenly assumed he wouldn't have to contend too much with the mind behind it.